I want to tell you about the moment I found out exactly what I meant to a family I had spent 14 years building. It didn't happen with a fight. There was no slammed door, no raised voice, no late-night ultimatum across the kitchen table. It happened at a dinner table in a banquet room on Broadway in Nashville, Tennessee, with string lights overhead and the smell of gardenia centerpieces in the air. And it happened so quietly that the people sitting next to me never even noticed I'd stopped breathing. But before I get to that night, I need to take you back. Because you can't understand what that dinner table meant without knowing what came before it. I met Dolores 14 years ago at Cornerstone Baptist Church on Nolensville Pike. She was sitting in the third pew from the front in a yellow dress, and she had her son beside her, a 9-year-old named Deshawn with a too big clip-on tie and his mother's serious eyes. He was sitting up straight, the way kids do when they've been told to behave, and they actually intend to try. I thought, this is a boy who is working at something. I know that feeling. Dolores and I started talking after the service. She was direct from the first minute. She told me right up front she had a son, that his father, Carlton, was not in the picture the way he should have been, and that she was not looking for someone to fix anything. She was just trying to live her life with some dignity. I respected that. I was 51 years old, with enough scar tissue from 2 previous marriages to know when a woman was telling you the truth instead of a version of it. We dated 2 years before I asked her to marry me. By then, Deshawn was 11. He called me by my first name, which was fine. I was not trying to replace anybody. I was just trying to be a consistent presence. And that word, consistent, is one I kept coming back to in the years that followed, because it turned out to be the thing I was best at and the thing that mattered least to anyone in that house except me. Carlton Bridges was whatever the opposite of consistent looked like. He'd come through Nashville maybe twice a year, drive up in something loud and barely paid for, take Deshawn out for sneakers or to a Predators game, and then disappear again for another 6 months without a forwarding address. He never paid child support. I know this because Dolores told me early on, the same calm way she told me about the cracked water heater in her apartment and the overdue electric bill. She wasn't asking me to fix any of it. She was just laying out the landscape so I couldn't say I hadn't seen it. I didn't judge her for any of it. You don't always get to choose who fathered your child. But you do get to choose what comes next. We married in 2011 in a small ceremony at the church. Dolores wore cream-colored lace. Deshawn stood beside me at the altar with a better tie this time, and after the ceremony he shook my hand, firm grip, looked me in the eye, and said, "Congratulations." I didn't know what to say back, so I said, "Thank you, son." He didn't correct me. I worked as a licensed electrician, ran my own small crew out of a shop on Murfreesboro Road. I am not a wealthy man, but I have always worked. My father's only real piece of advice before he passed was this: keep your name on the things you build. I took that seriously. The house on Caldwell Lane was mine, 3-bedroom brick ranch, porch I'd refinished twice, a garage so organized my crew called it the museum. I bought it before I met Dolores. It stayed in my name after we married. She never asked about the deed. I took that as understanding. Maybe it was just patience. I couldn't tell you now. Deshawn graduated high school in 2020, one of those strange half-empty ceremonies in a parking lot because of the pandemic. I sat in my truck in the 3rd row and watched him cross a temporary stage. His diploma said Deshawn Carlton Bridges, not my name. I never asked for my name to be there, but I paid for his cap and gown. I paid for his senior photos and his class ring and his first semester's books at Tennessee State. I co-signed on his car loan when his credit wasn't built up yet. I helped him move into his apartment off Gallatin Pike when he got his technical certification and needed tools to start working. I drove him to Lowe's on a Saturday morning, and we spent 4 hours arguing about torque specs and loaded up my truck. I didn't keep a running total, That's not what you do. Deshawn met his fiancée Monique 2 years ago at the power company where they both worked. She was steady and sharp, asked real questions and expected real answers. They got engaged last Easter. Deshawn called me first, before Carlton, before his grandmother, before anyone. He said, "I wanted you to know. I didn't make a big thing of it, but I heard it." The wedding was set for October at a venue out in Brentwood, one of those converted barn properties surrounded by rolling Tennessee countryside that looks expensive in pictures because it is. Deshawn and Monique had put down a small deposit. The balance, catering, flowers, photography, the band, the venue itself, came to just over $34,000. I offered to cover it. Dolores said, "Are you sure?" I said I was. Deshawn said he'd pay me back. I told him not to worry about it. I meant both things. I spent 3 months coordinating with every vendor, reviewing menus, driving out to Brentwood twice to walk through setup logistics with the event coordinator. I signed every contract. I have a folder in my file cabinet that is 3 inches thick, every email and receipt in chronological order. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday night in October. Private room at a steakhouse on Broadway, about 30 people, both families, the wedding party, a few close friends. I ironed my charcoal blazer that morning, the one I keep for occasions that require me to look like someone who doesn't work with his hands 6 days a week. I pressed it myself. Dolores was already downstairs when I came down, phone in her hand. She glanced up and said, "You look nice." Then she looked back at her phone. In the car, she mentioned that Carlton was flying in from Memphis. She said it the way you'd mention traffic on I-65. "He's coming for the weekend," she said. "Deshawn wanted him there." I said, "Of course," and I meant it. What I did not know, what I didn't find out until I was standing at the hostess stand reading the seating chart, was that there was a head table, and I was not at it. The head table had Deshawn and Monique at the center, Monique's parents on her side, Dolores on his side, and the seat closest to the groom, right next to Dolores, had a place card with one name on it. Carlton. My card was at table 6, near the back, by the door to the kitchen. I stood there and read it twice. I am 63 years old, and I have learned not to let my face say what my chest is doing. I folded the card back down and walked to table 6, and introduced myself to the people already seated there. 2 of Monique's older cousins from Memphis, and a couple I'd never seen before who turned out to be Carlton's +2. Carlton had brought guests to a dinner I had paid for. I sat down. I asked the server for a glass of water. Carlton arrived about 20 minutes later. I had seen him exactly twice in 14 years. He was shorter than I remembered, wearing a blazer with the crease still in it from the hanger. He hugged Deshawn at the door, long and performative. He hugged Dolores next. She patted his back in a way that was too easy, too familiar. The muscle memory of people who have a history that doesn't include you. He sat down at the head table. He ordered a drink and settled in like he'd built the room. The dinner was served in courses. The people around me were friendly. I answered their questions. Yes, I was Deshawn's stepfather. Yes, I was proud of him. Yes, the venue tomorrow was supposed to be beautiful. I ate my food. I watched the head table. About halfway through the main course, a woman came to our table, Monique's mother, introducing herself to guests she hadn't met. She was gracious, warm. When she got to me, she said, "And you are?" Before I could answer, Dolores's voice came across the room. She'd seen somehow from the head table, she said, "Bonita, that's a close family friend of ours. He's been very supportive." She said it casually, the way you'd identify a piece of furniture. I shook Bonita's hand. I said, "So nice to meet you." The toasts started after dessert. Monique's father went first, and he was gracious and funny, and you could tell he'd practiced it. Then the maid of honor. Then Dolores stood up and talked about Deshawn, about raising him, about the hard years, about how proud she was. She did not mention who had been beside her for the past 14 of those years. Not once. Then Carlton stood up. He held his glass like a man who had never doubted he deserved the floor. He talked about his son. He talked about watching Deshawn become a man, about how he always knew the boy had it in him. He looked at Deshawn across the table with his whole chest. He said, "That's my boy." The room applauded. I held my glass through all of it. I did not drink. I did not clap. I sat at table 6 by the kitchen door, and I stayed very still while a man who had never co-signed a loan, never sat in a school auditorium, never wired a single dollar in child support, never done one consistent thing for that boy in his entire life. That man took a bow in a room that my money had paid for. I drove home alone. Dolores texted at 11:30. They were going to keep celebrating on Lower Broadway. She said, "Don't wait up. Love you." There was no question mark, no invitation. I put the phone on the kitchen counter and stood there in my house in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling fan going around and thought about the place card at table 6. I thought about the words "close family friends" said out loud by my wife of 13 years in a room full of people. I thought about Carlton's arm on the back of her chair. I thought about $34,000 and my signature on every line. By 6 in the morning, I was at the kitchen table with my file folder. I made my first call at 8 o'clock. I called the venue coordinator out in Brentwood and told her I needed to put a hold on further payment authorizations until I could make some adjustments to the account. She asked if there was a problem. I said there was a clarification. Then I called the catering company, then the florist, then the photographer. Same conversation each time. No authorization should be processed without a new signed approval from me. Some of them said they'd have to contact the couple directly. I said, that's their right to know. Then I went to First Tennessee on Thompson Lane, where I'd been a customer for 22 years, and I spoke to the branch manager. I separated the joint checking account. What was mine returned to being only mine. Then I called my attorney. She had handled my business contracts and both my previous divorces. I told her what I was doing and what I expected would come next. She didn't say she'd warned me. She just said, "Come in Monday. We'll talk about next steps." Dolores came home Saturday at noon, 3 hours before the ceremony was supposed to begin. Her face when she walked through the door was a color I hadn't seen on her before. Not anger red, something paler, tighter. The face of someone running arithmetic and not liking where it lands. She said, "What did you do?" I was sitting at the kitchen table, same chair, coffee cold in the mug. I said, "I stopped doing things. There's a difference." She told me Deshawn was calling vendors. The caterer was saying there was no authorization. The florist had backed out. Her voice was rising. She said, "This is his wedding day." I said, "I know. I asked to be part of it. You put me at table 6. She stared at me. I said, "I heard you call me a close family friend, Dolores." You said it to Benita right across the room. Close family friends don't write checks with 5 figures on them. She left the room to call Deshawn. I could hear her voice through the wall, urgent, trying to explain something she hadn't thought through when she'd arranged the seating chart. Deshawn called me 10 minutes later. His voice was different from Dolores's. Quiet. He wasn't yelling. He just said one word, "Why?" I said, "Because somebody in that room needed to be honest about who I am. I thought you might be the one to do it. You weren't." I didn't make a scene. I sat at table 6 and I held my glass and I let your father give his toast and I stayed quiet all night. But I am done paying for a seat by the kitchen door. He didn't say anything for a while. I said, "I'm sorry about the timing. That part, I mean." He said, "I didn't tell her to seat you there." I said, "I know. But you didn't move me either." The line went quiet. I could hear Dolores in the background, and behind her, faintly, Monique's voice. And that's the part that landed the hardest. Monique hadn't done anything wrong. She was standing somewhere in a dress she'd been planning for a year, and her wedding was unraveling on the morning of her wedding. That hurt. I want to be honest about that. I said, Deshawn, listen, I will make all of this right. I will call every vendor back right now and restore everything if you can look me in the eye, even over this phone, and tell me one true thing. He said, What? I said, Tell me who raised you. The line was quiet long enough that I thought he might hang up. He said, You did. I said, Then that is all I needed. Not a speech, not my name on a program, not a seat at the head table. I just needed one person in that family to say the true thing out loud. He said, I know that. I've always known that. I said, I know you do. I just needed to hear it. I called every vendor back that morning. I restored every authorization. The wedding happened. I heard it was beautiful. There were photographs on Monique's mother's social media page, and the barn looked like something out of a magazine, with the fall leaves coming in orange and gold all around it. I was not there. Dolores and I have not been in the same room since that Saturday in October. My attorney filed the separation papers on a Monday morning. The house on Caldwell Lane is still in my name because it has always been in my name. There is a man who comes into the hardware store on Nolansville Pike every Tuesday morning. His name is Horace. He is 81 years old, retired Army, and he buys the same grade of sandpaper every single week, even though as far as I can tell, he has no project to use it on. I asked him about it once. He said, Habit is the only honest thing about getting old. I started talking to Horace the way you start talking to someone in a waiting room, slow, then all at once. I told him about Dolores, about Table 6, about Carlton's toast, about the way $34,000 can feel like nothing at all when the right person introduces you to a stranger. Horace listened without reacting. He didn't tell me I'd handled it well or badly. He didn't offer legal advice. When I was done, he looked at me sideways over his reading glasses and said, You know what your problem was. I said, Which one? He said, You kept trying to earn a seat at a table that had already been decided. You cannot earn your way into being seen by people who have already decided what you are to them. At some point, you have to stop showing up for people who are only showing up for what you provide. I sat with that for a while. He said, The sandpaper isn't for a project. I come in here on Tuesday mornings because it makes me feel like a man with somewhere to be. Sometimes that is the whole job. I understood that more than I could say. Deshawn called me in November. A Tuesday evening cold enough to see your breath, bare trees down the whole length of Caldwell Lane. He asked if he could come by. I said yes. He sat at my kitchen table, the one by the window, where the late afternoon light comes in good. Still in his work uniform, one of those fleece vests with the power company logo. He looked tired in the way that is different from sleepy. Honest tired, like a man who has been carrying something and has finally set it down and is looking at what it actually weighs. He told me Carlton went back to Memphis 3 days after the wedding. Hadn't returned a single call since. I said, I'm not surprised. He said, I know. I think I knew at the dinner. But it was my wedding. I wanted him to be something he wasn't. I said, I understand that more than I probably should. He said, Mom told me you paid for the whole thing. I knew you were paying, but I didn't know it was everything. She never told me it was everything. I said, it doesn't matter now. He said, it does matter. That's what I kept trying to figure out how to say. It matters more than I knew how to tell you when I was younger. We sat there for a while without talking. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one down Caldwell Lane, the way they always do in November when the dark falls early. He said, I'm sorry I didn't say something at the dinner. I saw where they put you. I should have moved you myself. I said, yes, you should have. He said, I know. I said, an apology doesn't undo it, but it's a beginning, if you want one. He looked at his hands on the table. He said, I would, if you do. I said, then come back next Tuesday. There's a man named Horace who's going to watch me humiliate myself trying to build a router table. And I could use someone else in the room to make me feel less ridiculous. Something moved across his face. That wasn't quite a smile yet, but was getting there. He left at 8 o'clock. I watched his headlights back out of the driveway and turned down the street, and I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer in the quiet that felt chosen rather than leftover. The divorce was finalized in January. The house stayed in my name because it had always been in my name. Dolores got what was hers, and I made sure of that. My attorney said I was being too generous. I said I wasn't being generous. I just didn't want to spend my energy arguing over things that didn't change the truth of what happened. What I know now, at 63, that I did not know at 51, is this: you can love people who do not love you back in the same proportion. You can give and give and give and still be a stranger in the room when someone more convenient walks in. Love is not the same as being valued, and being present is not the same as being seen. A man can give 14 years of himself to a family and still be introduced to strangers as a close family friend. But here is what I also know. I know that in November, when a grown man I helped raise sat down at my kitchen table and said 2 honest words, "You did," that was worth more than every seat at every head table in Nashville, Tennessee. I know that Horace is right. Habit is the only honest thing about getting old, and the habit I am building now is the habit of only going where I am actually wanted. I know that the router table is coming along. Deshawn came back the following Tuesday and the one after that, and Horace has appointed himself quality control, even though he has never once touched a power tool in the 3 months I have known him. It's the best Tuesday morning I can remember in years. And I know this, which took me too long to learn. You do not have to raise your voice to take your power back. You do not have to break anything or threaten anyone, or make a scene in a banquet room with string lights overhead. Sometimes all you have to do is stop. Stop holding up a roof that was never built to shelter you. Stop making yourself small so that other people can feel large. Stand up quietly, put your jacket on, and walk out into the clean, cold air. That is enough. That is the whole thing right there. If this story touched something in you today, something you've been carrying for a long time without a word for it, I want to hear about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share this with them. From all of us here at Voices of Uncle Russell, take care of yourself. You are worth far more than the seat they gave you.